I'll start off with a introduction of myself. I'm Chris Aguilar Garcia. I am here because I'm a huge fan of Around the World in a Day. Actually, D'Angelo, I don't know if you probably do remember, but we actually met because of my tattoo at
Oh, I remember. I remember.
we were at the Manchester conference, and I was talking to Harold Pride, and he saw the my tattoo and said, "Oh my God, have you met D'Angela?" And he like made sure that we met. So, all real quick before we get started, going to show you that for anyone who has not seen. Not sure if I've got it there good, but
Mm,
yeah. So this was done in multi stages over a few years. Started first with Prince Wendy and Lisa in black and
mm,
white.
mhm.
Then I went around and added these guys in color, then added the color and ladder to the front. And of course, I did the ladder as purple. It's not quite so purple anymore, it's faded. And then just last year, I added on the planet, the plane, the little dog, and then a couple of doves. So the original plan, I was going to do like the whole kind of like the spots from the lady, but I really just like the minimalist look of having them all hang out. So that is enough about me. We are here to hear the amazing Arthur Turnbull
Oh,
on
thank you.
the topic when Prince left the Minneapolis Sound out through the indoor. So I'm gonna jump out and hand it over to Arthur. I'll see you all in Q&A. Yes, please also be thinking of questions along the way and using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom bar. And we're getting ready, I think, for the first ever 1 hour individual presentation. So, we'll-
A little extra time.
yeah. All right, everyone, give it up for Arthur.
Chris, thank you so very much. It's good to see you. And
Yeah.
D'Angelo, thank you. I am always honored to be asked back to the symposiums. I love the community. I love participating. And I love talking a lot, which is why D'Angelo's been so graceful into incrementally giving me just a little more time to try to stick the landing, if you will. So let's see, it's actually my first virtual presentation, which we were all, D and I were both surprised about because it's like I'd actually never done a virtual one before. So I am going to get my stuff together and we grab that and we should be good money. All right. So the title of my presentation is Out Through the Indoor when Prince left the Minneapolis Sound. Um, Around the World in a Day is a special album for me. Um, I sometimes I try to rank the albums, and I always kind of fall short, or do they switch around a lot, and so Around the World in a Day as an album, as a body of work, is probably like below my top five, closer to 10, just as sort of a whole for just all these random reasons. But for a very personal reason, I want to dedicate this talk to my mom, who was very was very supportive in me and the music that I liked and appreciated. Um, and she did go out of her way to make sure that I had Around the World in a Day on April 22nd. She worked in San Francisco. We lived in Oakland. And it's not far, but it's not close, particularly on a Tuesday after work. Um, and going out of her way to go to, I believe, a Rainbow Records and bring the album home for me. We had a difficult time for the year of 85 in that she was actually going through a divorce with my then stepfather. And 85 became a time where there was a lot of upheaval And as a 14-year-old, it was my first experience of seeing my mom in a vulnerable space, but also needing to kind of learn how to take care of her as she was taking care of me. And I gripped tightly onto the three albums that we're discussing today in particular. Um, okay, so give me just a second because again, first time like doing this, I just want to make sure if you all could give me kind of like thumbs up or hearts that you can actually see my slides. You
Yep.
should be. Oh, good. The the voice from the top of the ladder. Thank you. Um, I do remember vividly when I read this quote from Prince in a September issue of Rolling Stone magazine entitled Prince Talks. Uh, it it I had not really understood that um, well, I didn't know anything about the record business, right? I just knew that I consumed records. So in a very linear space, if one record came out in 1984 and another record came out in 1985, the 85 record was actually recorded in 1985, you know. But in reading this, it began to kind of expand my scope and understand that, oh, not only can he walk and chew gum, but it does make sense that he would have, you know, some time in between the release of the album Purple Rain and the film to be able to record more music before he actually goes on what was then supposed to be a world tour. So it also explained why certain songs on Around the World in a Day felt familiar to me and somewhat associated even to some Purple Rain songs. The Ladder to Purple Rain, and even Tambourine to When Doves Cry, only because the idea that on Tambourine, he's singing on top of a drum beat with some sparse synthesizer. And Doves Cry, which is really the unicorn song, just a mammoth. He's doing the same thing. He's singing over a drum track with some heavy synths, right? But most strongly, I felt an association between the song Raspberry Beret and Take Me With You. And understanding later as an adult that Prince had the follow up to Purple Rain completed by the end of 1984, I feel he created two opportunities for himself: the room to develop his next album and film project, which ultimately would be Parade and Under the Cherry Moon, and also the ability to walk away from the sound that he had created that became the template for R&B and pop music for the remainder of the 1980s. Um, I also feel that 85 was somewhat of a victory lap of sorts for him, that after achieving career-changing success from the film Purple Rain in particular, which vaulted the album sales and also fueled demand for ticket sales to what was, again, supposed to be an accompanying world tour, this purple zeitgeist carried on throughout 1985. And he was on television quite a bit that year. We saw him win American Music Awards. We saw him on the Brit Awards, those of us who live particularly in the UK. We saw him win Grammys. And we even saw him accept the Academy Award for music from Purple Rain. Last year, during D'Angelo's Erotic City 40 Symposium, I described Purple Rain as a purple machine, something that has overshadowed every other album that Prince has ever made since 1984, and Around the World in a Day, as the direct follow-up to this juggernaut, bore the full weight of comparison. So again, to know that Prince made the album shortly after completing Purple Rain, before the tour, before the awards, before the zeitgeist, put some of his later moves into perspective. Chiefly that yes, he wanted the music on Around the World in a Day to sound different, but more importantly, Prince did not want to be trapped by his own success. So, put plainly, Prince made the decision to walk away from the sound that helped him achieve his greatest success to date. And I believe that he starts this process on the very album that makes him a superstar. Now, I got a side note that the sound that I'm talking about, of course, came to be popularized as the Minneapolis sound. But really, it was the outgrowth of Duff likes to call it the Prince sound, which is actually spot on. But really, it was the outgrowth of what Prince had been playing since 1980 that became fully formed by 1982 with the release of the 1999, excuse me, the 1999 album, and a real history about Black music in particular, but the sound of Minneapolis can be found in Andrea Swenson's book, Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound. So you'll hear me say Minneapolis sound, but I'm being very specific about this Prince sound. All right. We need to imagine a world before Purple Rain in order to, well, really, y'all be helping me out because this is like the whole context of what I'm really talking about. Before Purple Rain, whatever was known about Prince in 1983, the average radio listener and music video viewer, both MTV and like local channels, at the very least, we knew Little Red Corvette. It was his first impactful so-called crossover song, right? And we've got big Oberheim synthesizer chords. We've got an LM1 drum machine pattern, right? And an aggressive guitar solo. Synth, drum machine, guitar solo. Okay. When we get to May 1984, and we hear When Doves Cry, the preview song from the upcoming Purple Rain album, okay, we get the same building blocks. Oberheim synth, LM1 drums, guitar solo. All right. If we see the film and or we get the album first, doesn't really matter. The first song that we hear from Purple Rain is Let's Go Crazy. Synth, LM1 drum beat, guitar solo. Okay. This is the established sound of Prince by the summer of 1984. But when we get to the next song, the second song on Purple Rain, Take Me With You, we start to hear something different. We've got a string section throughout. We have the return of acoustic guitar, which had had a long absence in a Prince song. And we even get finger cymbals. You know, some years ago, I would participate also in a Prince Twitter thread series that was organized by friends DJ and Edgar Krause. And some of what I'm mentioning here, I developed in those threads. I particularly did a whole thread on Take Me With You when we were celebrating Purple Rain. So yeah, that happened. And this is kind of the gist of what I'm talking about. The key to all this is that Prince wants to grow his audience. And we knew that. He'd been saying that. We've heard podcasts with other members of the Revolution, Des Dickerson, Lisa Coleman, Wendy, Brown Mark, that Prince wanted to grow the audience during 1999 and particularly going into 1984 with Purple Rain. Okay. And by early 84, Prince was getting really good at writing pop songs. Now, pop song, that's just a construct. It's not really a genre, right? It's music that's popular to a wide assortment of music buyers and music listeners, okay? Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us is a pop song, right? Regardless of what's happening with the song, okay? And Take Me With You has signatures of a great pop song. It's catchy. After a few listens, you know all the words to the song. You can sing it, and it stays in your head. Right? But there's a different mood or vibe, if you will, that you don't get from the other songs on the album. It is a bit of a standout in a way. We can debate whether or not it's dramatic, but Take Me With You is kind of doing its own thing. And if you think about it, Take Me With You and When Doves Cry were the only songs in the film Purple Rain that were not performed on stage at the club. Take that for what you will. I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting thing to me. But this is Prince pushing against his signature sound. Oberheim, LM1 drum pattern, lead guitar. All right. This is further evidenced by him recording in real time, January 1984. This is further evidenced by him recording Manic Monday, a song that became a defining hit for the Bangles in 1985, like the following week. I think early February of 1984, he records Manic Monday. So we start to see him creating a pathway out of the sound, right? On the very album that provides him a doorway into public discussion, pop music, growing my audience. All right. Now, we hear drastic difference in the songs on Around the World in a Day, the album that he records after he finishes Purple Rain. Okay. But Raspberry Beret in particular has those same pop skills that Prince is honing in Take Me With You. And that's because he'd been working on Raspberry Beret since 1982. There are even bootlegs of sound checks where he's sound checking Raspberry Beret with the band during the Purple Rain tour. So in all, this is moving Prince away from the Minneapolis sounds when it was added to Purple Rain as he's exploring a new framework for himself, a pop framework for himself. Okay, my second side note. I've been saying, hey, the Purple Rain tour was billed as a world tour, and it was. There are even t-shirts that the estate sells, replicas of Prince and the Revolution World Tour 1984, 1985. But because Prince decided against the world part of that branding, it freed up his schedule for the spring and arguably the summer of 1985. Okay. He was just tired of touring somewhere around January of 85. And much to the chagrin of everyone else that was not named Prince, the US leg came to an end on April 7th in Miami. And this very likely was a great disappointment to fans overseas that had anticipated him coming and bringing Purple Rain over across the Atlantic. But it did give Prince the room to begin his next album and film project in the coming months. Like, if you will, his other album that he's going to be working on. Okay, now we get to Around the World in a Day. And that is actually a logo, Warner Brothers logo for the Black division of Warner Brothers Records. And again, I'm not super savvy about how the record business works. But there were, divisions. And we can imagine that Prince, who actually was still being worked by the Black music division of Warner Brothers Records, we could probably imagine that he didn't necessarily have the same kind of budget that, say, Madonna's Like a Virgin had on whatever floor that, the pop rock artists were working from. But still, aside from all that, we know that in mid-February of 1985, I believe it was February 21st, during Prince's run of shows at the LA Forum during the Purple Rain tour, there is a hastily scheduled listening party that's arranged for executive staff and some guests at Warner Brothers offices in Los Angeles. This is shortly before the Grammys telecast, where he wins 3 awards and closes the show out with the Baby I'm a Star performance. Now, there are conflicting reports on reactions to the album. It was played in full in a conference room of some sort. There was a Rolling Stone article that ran in early April, sort of previewing the release of Around the World a Day. And in that article, it was said that listeners applauded after every song that was heard, right? But Mary Lou Badeau, who led Warner Brothers Black Music Division, and she has a long history of being a Prince supporter, said that there were several who were dismayed in the marketing team at how to market this album, how to advertise this album, as it was so very different from Purple Rain, which was the whole point of it, according to Prince. Now, I feel, it's my personal opinion, but I feel that, a reason for the marketing team's reaction, assuming that there was in fact dismay over what they were hearing on Around the World in a Day, is that there was an anticipation for a sequel, a Purple Rain-esque sequel album. And so there could have been preconceived ideas of how creative assets would look. These assets being magazine ads, billboards, in-store displays at record stores, etc. And what made it more challenging was that Prince himself wasn't giving up too much to help out. There were no promotional pictures of him or the revolution. He's not even on the cover, his picture, right? That were usually sent out to newspapers as file photos. And Prince, specifically requested that there be no single release, advanced single from Around the World in a Day that can be given out to radio, saying that he wanted Around the World in a Day to be listened to and critiqued as a whole. This would leave radio stations to their own devices on what song to play from what was probably the most anticipated of album of 1985. Now, I personally remember, being in the car, being driven to school, and, you know, maybe a radio station played Pop Life, maybe a radio station played, Raspberry Beret, maybe radio station started Tambourine and like stopped, like, whoa, we can't play this, played something else, but they didn't know. So there was no sort of unified call or identifier to say, this is the single, we're rolling with this. But again, the fact that the album is done and delivered to Warner Brothers, Prince is handing off this album, means that Prince has cleared room on his creative calendar. All right. So to clear even more room, Prince announces a retirement from performing for some sort of indeterminable amount. He says that he's going to go look for the ladder. And there's also the first reference to sometimes it snows in April. But it is a definitive answer on if Prince will tour in support of Around the World in a Day. Okay. And so not 2 weeks after this, 10 days after finishing the Purple Rain tour on April 7th, which in Prince's mind is a closed book. I'm done with Purple Rain. That's in the past. I've handed off Around the World in a Day. That's in the past. It's a current project, but that's in the past, right? Prince begins to work on Parade on April the 16th. Okay. April the 16th, he starts working on this album. Around a week later, Around the World in a Day is released. Again, this is the end of the Purple Rain era from the standpoint of the Purple Rain album itself, and also the music that he recorded during that period. It's old music to him. And this isn't it, to talk about the end of the Purple Rain era, it's not so much as like an event as it is my opinion on Prince's mindset. Even though he's done with Purple Rain, the listening public and even some of the fan base, frankly, like we're not necessarily done with that. We like that sound, right? So we find that there's a polarizing reaction to the initial reviews and also the initial opinions of the content of the album. Some people love it, some people hate it. We also maybe see some peeling away in the fan base between the people that are becoming or have been Prince fans and also people that to say that they are a Prince fan, what they're really saying is that they're a fan of Purple Rain. And so now we've got this change. And so they're not really messing with it too much anymore. And lastly, Sweet Revenge or Not, Around the World in a Day does bump the USA for Africa album, which contains For the Tears in Your Eyes, from the Billboard top spot in early June. So going into the spring, on May the 1st, Prince has finished a draft configuration of Parade. We know that he's fast and everything, but I mean, if you kind of think about it, we've put out an album, but we've completed a new album. Is pretty remarkable from a creative standpoint. May the 7th, there is an expose, quote in quotes, from the National Enquirer where Chick Huntsbury gives this, behind the door detailing of Prince's life. He worships Marilyn Monroe, he lives in isolation, he's afraid of this, that, and the third, and all of that. So we've got two PR crises in the wind at this point. The snub of the We Are the World group recording, and the immediate assault on a photographer who tried to get into Prince's limousine to get a picture. But because he's Prince, all of this is amplified. And so now we're dealing with this National Enquirer story. So we've got two versions of Prince. A Purple Rain Prince that is being discussed in the National Enquirer and that has snubbed Quincy Jones, Mike, Lionel, and the gang for the We Are the World session. And we also have this future version of Prince who is really focused on the new music and developing his Under the Cherry Moon film. Something that happens that I don't think it certainly ever happened before, but I don't know if he's really done this since, where he's recorded a song. Well, Baltimore does ring a bell. But Hello, the B-side to Pop Life, is a song where Prince is directly addressing the American Music Awards lack of his participation as far as singing the song with everyone else. And also the assault on the photographer. And he talks about his side of it. And he also talks about how he has been consistent in supporting charities and dealing and calling out the fact that there are hungry children that are here in the United States, and to try to kind of, well, push back, of course, but create some space for himself, and declare that I'm not all bad, right? There are two sides to these stories. So, and forgive me for kind of like, jumping quickly, but I'm trying to hit a lot of these dates. And I know I got a rep for not finishing, so I'm a little sensitive to that. I'm coming up on the 27-minute mark. Summer. The big thing about the summer of 1985 was the Live Aid concerts. There were two. One happened in Wembley Arena or Wembley Stadium, forgive me, in London, England. The other happened I forget, all my Philly people, I forget the name of what the stadium is there, but there were two of these concurrent concerts, and it was like a really big event. MTV did this whole live thing, right? And as part of it, we have the video that Prince did with Wendy and Lisa, an acoustic version of For the Tears in Your Eyes. And we really see the debut of the short hair. We got a glimpse of it earlier in June, a month earlier in June, with the Raspberry Beret video, which has a very Purple Rain-esque motif, given that the members of the revolution were representing characters in the painting that appears as the cover of Around the World in a Day. And the week of June 17th, was the premiere of the Raspberry Beret video. On June the 18th, Prince and his manager, Steve Farnolli, fly to France to scout Under the Cherry Moon locations. In July, forgive me, I'm looking at my notes. In July, the Pop Life single comes out with Hello as the B-side. There's no promotional video done for that. So MTV and the other video channels are just going to have to be content with Raspberry Beret. But again, Raspberry Beret is a sort of a variation of Prince in Purple Rain mode. I had said this for those that had joined us during the For You crew roundtable that I I I do know that I saw the video on television. I remember watching that. Um, and what I also remember was, but not vividly, so correct me if I'm wrong for those who really, locked in or have some sort of VHS copy of this. I don't remember like this huge fanfare over the For the Tears in Your Eyes video, at least on the same scale as the anger and the name calling that Prince had to endure when he didn't show up for this We Are the World session, even though he had already negotiated, hey, I'm going to give you a song to add to this album. So I kind of feel like this was just an example of MTV kind of playing both sides of the street in their opinions on Prince. It's like they need him, it's like they need him at the party, but they really don't want him there. I just kind of got that vibe from that. But for the Tears of Your Eye, here's the takeaway. For the Tears of Your Eye video debuts in July, and this is the first glimpse of what would become Christopher Tracy, the Parade era. Okay, moving right along. Fall of 85. The Rolling Stone interview titled Prince Talks comes to newsstands. Now, it's got an issue date of, I believe, September the 12th. I got it here somewhere. But Rolling Stone was a bi-monthly publication, and they would post-date their issues. So in buying an issue of Rolling Stone that says September the 12th, you were actually purchasing it 2 weeks prior. So I'm estimating around August the 27th that this issue came out. And this was one of those things, shout out to my mother again, where somehow I found out when the issue was going to release. I found a newsstand in downtown Oakland that was selling it. And my mom, before work, drove me to this newspaper stand. I bought 2 copies of this Rolling Stone, and then my mother dropped me off at my summer school session. That's how I know that it didn't actually come out on September the 12th, because otherwise I would have been in school. But I vividly remember what I was doing and where I was at when I read the interview. And something else to note, that the cover of the magazine obviously is a video still of Raspberry Beret, but also the made in single photo inside introducing the Prince Talk, that was the name of the article, the Prince Talk interview, was just a different slide from Raspberry Beret, showing that Prince was not on any additional photos of him, which makes me think that he was kind of beginning to guard his persona so that he wouldn't so much let too much out of the bag with what was coming the following year with Under the Cherry Moon. Okay, so August 27th, early September, late August, early September, we got Rolling Stone. Mid-September, we have the PMRC Senate hearings. The PMRC, headed by Tipper Gore, then Senator and former Vice President Al Gore's wife, and also the wife of then Chief of Staff to Ronald Reagan, James Baker's wife. I just don't remember her first name. This becomes a thing stemming from Tipper listening to Purple Rain with her daughter in late 1984 and hearing Darling Nikki and the content of that song. I I give credit to Tipper for actually going by her words and also her book that she wrote about this. I give her credit for listening to the album with her child. That shows some real interest as a parent to see both what their child is listening to, but also what their child's just into, right? So I give her credit for that. Beyond that, I kind of think she got a little bit out of pocket. Okay. But with that, the accompanying image on this slide is of People magazine dated September the 16th, entitled Has Rock Gone Too Far? And it's an issue that's related to these upcoming Senate hearings. And we see Prince on the cover, again, in Purple Rain mode, because the majority of the photos of Prince during this period were from the Purple Rain tour. And he's positioned along with Madonna and David Lee Roth, whom at the time was the frontman for Van Halen. All three Warner Brothers artists. Oh, well, so snap. So, sorry, I want to make sure. All right, rookie. Okay. Something that I'm asserting in this talk is that we as the public, we as Prince fans, we as casual, newspaper and news magazine checkout by magazine buyers, right? At checkout stands in supermarkets. I'm saying the public, we were reacting to a version of Prince that no longer existed. I talked earlier about the reaction to Around the World in a Day and the separation that started between Prince fans and Purple Rain fans. I know I did, but some of us may have had friends that didn't have a positive reaction to Around the World in a Day. Maybe they like one song, maybe they like no songs, right? And it was because they really liked the Purple Rain sound. I knew kind of like in my circle, America was one of those songs that people really liked, right? Um, but also, he was now an established artist. He was no longer up and coming. He was no longer the next thing. He was the thing, right? And so because he became established, this allowed for space for a new crop of up and coming artists to begin to emerge for teenagers, young adults, and 20 somethings, 30 somethings. And so here we see the advent of Whitney Houston. Her album, her debut album, self-titled, was released in February of 1985. We have hits like You Give Good Love, All at Once. She does a cover of Greatest Love of All, the George Benson song. Um, she is the next rising star with Clive Davis backing her at Arista Records. We've also got I'm going to use emergence loosely because they were already like stars. New Edition. All for Love was their third album, but it was their second self-titled album that was also eponymously named New Edition, with songs like Cool It Now and Mr. Telephone Man. They kind of inherited, I remember in my junior high, they inherited the button brigade. Like all the girls wore New Edition buttons in 85, the same girls that were wearing Purple Rain buttons in 84. So they inherited some of that mania that Prince was getting during that Purple Rain era. And also, and maybe even most importantly for different reasons, we have the emergence of LL Cool J in his album Radio. LL was a force. His album went gold within 6 months. And it's key to note that rap was not a thing like that, like it is now in 1985. In 1985, the biggest stars were Run DMC, who were stars of the Crush Groove film that Sheila E appears in. And incidentally, LL Cool J and New Edition had cameos in Crush Groove. But LL was one of us, meaning 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. He's like 17 in this picture. His album Radio is released when he's 16 years old, right? He looked like us. Run DMC looked like, like our dad's friends. They look like grown-ups, our older brothers, right? So we directly related to LL. And he was the first that I knew of that took a shot at Prince in the song Rock the Bells. I know I quote You Hated Michael and Prince all the way ever since, but there's also that Are you Jerry curled suckers wearing high heel boots like ballerinas? What I mean is you're a Fruit Loop troop. Some people say that he was talking about Full Force. Well, yeah, but we know that high heels were the thing of Prince, and it was the thing that was most talked about with Prince. And I think that I hope one day somewhere I can get into a discussion about the relationship between hip hop and Prince, because there was always this symbiotic relationship between the two. Because a lot of the people that liked LL Cool J and played his music on their radios in the back of the bus were the same kids that were playing When Doves Cry a year before in the back of the same bus using the same radios. Okay, sorry. So I don't mean to say that Prince becoming an established artist, I don't mean to say that he was not loved, but he did appear to be absent in what teens and young adults especially were connecting to. Sheila E. was filling some of this void with her Romance 1600 album. Sister Fate, yes, but particularly with A Love Bizarre. But, and I'm really trying to drive this point home, the connections that the teen and young adult audience were making with Prince with Purple Rain were this the same folks were some of the same people were disconnecting for during Around the World in a Day. And as such, we looked and were responding to surrogates. And here's my next side note. I compiled really a random list of songs. This is not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination, that were related yet unrelated to Prince. Prince has about 4 songs that he actually wrote that that were on this list. Just to note a few, of course, I'm highlighting Jesse Johnson in Free World, which was a B-side to the song Can You Help Me from his debut album, Jesse Johnson's Review. And that, at least in my neighborhood, in my school, that like had a lock on summer. Free World is Jesse Johnson's erotic city, in that it was played on radio stations. People would look to buy Jesse's album and not find Free World and be like, yo, what's up? You can kind of not escape that song for a period during the summer of 1985. We've also got Andre Simone and The Dance Electric, which was a monster Prince song, and you could hear Wendy and Lisa on the vocal. That acted as a proxy, as a surrogate for the absence of this Minneapolis sound that Prince really wasn't giving. Phil Collins' Sussudio, a pop song that it was known was a rip off of 1999. Collins himself admits that he was influenced by 1999 for that song because he regularly listened to the album during a tour with Genesis. And I believe it was most likely that this was the Mama tour. Genesis had an album in 1983 that was self-titled, and the lead song was Mama. So that's where the Mama tour comes from. And we know, a lot of us know the story about Alexander O'Neal. He was initially tapped as the frontman for the time. There was a meeting, and I'm being very generous by using the term meeting, between Alexander O'Neal, Prince, and Morris Day. And we know how that went. Morris Day was the frontman of the time. But there's really too much to say about Jesse Johnson in this context. Honestly, I think if Prince produced the album, I think D'Angelo would have a 4-album symposium this year, with Jesse Johnson's Review being added to The Family, Romance, and Around the World Today. Another thing that I want to point out, Ready for the World, who I have a petty irrational vitriol for because I never liked Ready for the World, and it's absolutely not fair, you know. And it's of the same vein as how I'll never forget Justin Timberlake to what he did for Janet. I don't give a damn who he apologized to, but I know people that really know me are like laughing at their screens right now. Think about it, though, Ready for the World locked in so tightly to what Prince was giving us in '84. Um, you know, the look, the sound, they were talented. And quite frankly, digital display is like a guilty pleasure of mine. So I'm saying that publicly. But we've also got the emergence of Morris Day with his first solo album. The Family, Screams of Passion, um, um, uh, was an impactful song for that summer. Of course, Love Bizarre, I mentioned that. Tamara and the Scene, a group discovered by Jesse Johnson, an album and song produced by Jesse Johnson, was a jam that summer. Um, Melissa Morgan did a cover of "Do Me Baby" that topped the R&B charts for 3 weeks. And of course, Manic Monday. And I got to say, I'm going on 45 minutes, so I am paying attention, Kim Glenn. I got to say that I sometimes wonder, and I'm specifically talking about Manic Monday, I sometimes wonder that if Prince kept Take Me With You, 17 Days, Manic Monday, and added Glamorous Life to the Apollonia 6 album, I wonder if Apollonia 6 would have been a sleeper pop group, really achieving the same objective that Prince had for the family. But it's not my topic. I just think that's just kind of like a thing. But one more thing, my last side note, because I will never, ever, ever have the opportunity to talk about the Jets. I want to say a word about the Jets. Um, they were a Tongan American group of 8 siblings from Robbinsdale, Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul. They had 5 top 10 songs. They had 1 platinum album, their debut, 1 gold album, their second album, and St. Paul Peterson, Matt Fink, engineer Coke Johnson, and David Z were involved in the production and performance of that album. David Z, in fact, produced Crush on You. And I think You've Got It All, but I put him last in this list anyway. So there's that. So back to Prince. Okay. Driving this home again. This is whom we are reacting to in mid-September of 1985. The kid, the Victorian romantic Prince with the high collar. But in reality, in mid-September 1985, this is what Prince looks like. This cover photo of Parade was shot by Jeff Katz in early September in Nice, France, right at the start of the filming of Under the Cherry Moon. And so, and forgive me, I know I'm jumping, but to go from this, which is what is on every magazine cover in video of some form, the guy that we saw on television, the guy that gets parodied on Saturday Night Live, the guy that's judged from what happened, you know, in January and February. It's this guy whose music that we have the appetite for. But it's this guy that is actually living, breathing, and thinking about what he's doing next, not the stuff that we're reacting to. That's the crux of what I'm talking about. Moving quickly now, the America video and single, which was a snippet of a short concert that was done in a big tent in France. This is also the staging for the MTV interview. And I put interview in quotes because the interview was actually conducted by Steve Farnolli, his manager, reading questions that were submitted by MTV. Mark Goodman, the VJ, introduces this this interview, and he's holding a copy of the Rolling Stone magazine. And the angle is that Prince is starting to talk now. Rolling Stone got him first in Prince, but we've got him first on camera. And Mark Goodman was kind of like the go-to guy for Prince. He was the one that hosted the Purple Rain movie party for MTV a year earlier, and he was the one that introduced the Raspberry Beret video. In fact, Prince even name checks him in the Neal Karlen interview in Rolling Stone. I Another personal thing, I had felt that it was unfair during one of the questions during this interview, where Prince is asked how he feels about assertions that he's left his Black audience for white audiences during the Purple Rain era, because MTV being a standard bearer, a gatekeeper, if you will, on what Black videos would get played on MTV, fun fact, 2 at the time, I thought that it was very hypocritical to effectively set a bar that Prince not only just crossed the threshold, but exceeded the threshold with the Little Red Corvette video, which was the entry point for Michael Jackson to get his videos on MTV. That then they turn around and critique him for meeting that threshold. Well, yeah, what about the audience that you left? So, you can find this interview on YouTube. Some of his answers, some of Prince's answers, just are a little cringy to me. They're just kind of, super dated 1985 shtick that he was doing. Again, he's got Christopher Tracy mode going, but it's interesting to see what he says and how he responds. A fun note about this interview, if you can see it in the picture, the still that I put up there, I think that Prince is careful at what he's revealing about what's coming next. He's wearing a ruffled shirt from the Purple Rain era, the high collar lace. And especially if you see it in the America video, after he takes off the trench coat, he's in Purple Rain-esque pants, meaning he's got like the lace back on the pants where you can kind of see, his body through the lace. He's not in that, he's not in that, right? He's still cagey a little bit on what fully is coming to pass, and with what's next. And in this interview, he is asked about his next album. The question has to do with the interviewer says someone was talking to David Z and David about the new album Around the World in a Day, and David C says, yeah, it's a great album, but you got to hear the next album. And Prince says, don't you like surprises? And he talks about how he does record at a rapid rate. And now, because, quote unquote, the girls are helping him, meaning Minnie and Lisa, he's getting this output faster. Okay. So we have an opportunity for him to exert his creativity by delivering the album Around the World in a Day to Warner Brothers in late February of 1984. And this creates the environment where he's got the opportunity to leave and walk away from the sound of the Minneapolis sound that he created, while at the same time maintaining popularity in the public consciousness through these surrogate songs. I don't mean to use the term surrogate derogatory. All those things, I listed all those songs because I love them. It gave us what we needed, but Prince is gone from all of that, but he's still maintained by this music through 1985. And I started talking about 5 years ago, I started talking about Prince operating in these 2 timelines, one for right now and one for what's next. And this started during another Prince Twitter thread that I participated in, where I was talking about the Ballad of Dorothy Parker. And in writing that and doing the background on that, I noticed that several things had happened, particularly in March of 1986. There were the parade tour rehearsals. preparing for the March 31st album release of Parade. So that's the present. He's operating in the present. Manic Monday and Kiss, but Manic Monday was in the Billboard Top 20 at the same time in March of 1986. So he's dealing with a kind of a past present scenario. He plays the Sheila E. Warfield concert in March of that year, too. And a week after showing up at Sheila E.'s Warfield concert, which is the concert that was released on videotape, Sheila E. and Romance 1600 Live, he performs A Love Bizarre on the video, but he also performed Kiss thereafter. But a week after playing that show, a guy that's in pre-parade tour and pre-parade release mode, he records the Ballad of Dorothy Parker a week later. So he's operating in the present and he's operating in the future. And these are two very different, at least to me, a mere mortal, these are two very different creative headspaces. And so thinking about Prince doing the present thing and the future thing concurrently made me wonder, well, was that the first time that he did that? And so, and forgive me, I tried to make a graphic, y'all. I ran out of time. I couldn't get it done. Here is kind of a summary of the dates that I've been talking about. And I highlighted some things that happened in the same rough period of time, but represent different stages of him: the past, the present, and the coming future. So we've got the final Prince concert that happens at April 7th. A couple weeks later, he releases Around the World Today. So that's old and that's new/current. But then he turns around about a week later and he puts together the first draft of the new, right? So now he's closed the book on Purple Rain. He's opened it on Around the World Today, but he started the first chapter of the Parade era. Later in the summer, I was talking about we've got the Live Aid and the Tears in Your Eyes video where he's revealing the Christopher Tracy look, but we don't really know what that is. We just figured dude cut his hair. But we also have the Senate hearings that happened, and we have the MTV interview where he's also, again, in the context of the PMRC let me restate, in the context of the PMRC hearing, he's dealing with the past, or at least the past is being discussed, but he's living in the future. He's discussing it with MTV and has a more fleshed out Christopher Tracy look while still dressed in the past that's familiar to us. So how does Prince end the year? He ends the year December the 28th with the Flesh Sessions. And the Flesh Sessions were two sessions, I believe at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles, one on December the 28th, where Prince was accompanied by Eric Leeds, Levi Caesar, and Sheila E., and another on January the 5th, 1986, with Prince adding Jonathan Melvoin, Wendy's brother, who played on Around the World in a Day, on the Around the World in a Day album. Lisa's with him, and Sheila and Levi Caesar. And they're playing a very different style of music. What ends up being realized and manifest on the upcoming Madhouse albums. I forget what Eric Leeds called it, Herbie Hancock Hunter's Light. But to us, when I heard Madhouse, it was like my weather report. It was my return to forever. So aside from all that, this is the beginning, end of 85, early 86, these Flesh Sessions. This is the beginning of the flood, as D'Angelo likes to call it. Accurately, I think, too. The flood of material that is created in 1986 and 1987, going into 1988, that produces so much material that's so very different than what the average bear would think of when they think of Prince and what his music sounds like. And so I think, and closing this off, the best example of all of this is that, not the example, but a takeaway, is that Prince has never, ever shied away from risk. And I don't think that he ever feared taking the up-teen risks throughout his career, regardless of their outcomes. And we see that with leaving the Minneapolis sound and expanding his artistic endeavor. 58 minutes, 30 seconds, y'all. Thank you. I did it the
You did it!
first time.
Wow. An hour's the magic spot, apparently. It fit. That's amazing. Well done. Just for that accomplishment alone. Um, wow, Arthur, this is amazing. Obviously, as you can see in the chat throughout. But yeah, no, I think one of the things I really appreciated was the image of Purple Rain prints to really bring home that idea of these two
Mm,
timelines that
mhm,
yes, the consciousness for the world is still at that point is high up on Purple Rain and what that's who that person is.
mhm.
And here he is like, a week later already 2 albums ahead.
Yeah.
And that too, I think that's something now that we're well aware of in terms of that kind of
Mhm,
that output for him and that creativity, but definitely at the time we did not know that. Or I think I didn't. I think most people didn't. The It also that reminded me of an essay in the year 1999 saying
mhm.
that about the genius of that song, that for the year 1999 it was a song that was about the past, present, and future
Yeah.
um in that idea. But yes, I think just always this movement through time for him, um how that was just so a piece of both how he was creating and what he was creating. It was also
Mhm.
about that looking forward. um I am going to go right into some questions here from the audience and throw them into Q&A if you have others. The first being, was Prince's rush to release Around the World in a Day also Prince's rejection of classic rock radio's embrace of Let's Go Crazy and When Doves Cry and pop music's ethos for 1985?
Mm. Uh, so in a lot of ways, I feel that the ultimate objective was I want to expand my audience. But I think that he also wanted it both ways. That he wanted to expand his audience, but he wanted to expand his audience on his own terms. So, for example, and this does speak to, rock and rock radio and rock ideals. If you want to expand your audience and you put out an album, Purple Rain, that you know is good, know that you can begin to expand your audience. But then something happens with the accompanying film that we just didn't know if it was going to work. We didn't know if it was going to be successful. And when it was successful, it completely, like, listen, I don't know anybody that had anything to do with Purple Rain, the financing, the ideas, or anything like that. But I know that Purple Rain exceeded whatever their highest expectation was for that film. So to cut off the Purple Rain tour and keep it as a US only endeavor, don't you kneecap yourself? Or at least don't you kneecap your agenda to expand your audience to the maximum amount of people that you could possibly reach? And I mean, I am looking at Europe, but there was also a market building in Japan. Last year, I pulled out a copy of a radio DJ promo called "Strange Tales from the Rain," and they only made like 500 of them. and they were making it for Japan and for radio DJs in Japan to familiarize themselves and their audiences with Prince's body of work, along with Purple Rain, but also the earlier material as well from 1999 back to Prince. I don't think there was anything on For You on that. It might have been Soft to Wet. So yeah, all the way back from the back catalog. So I do think that he had strong feelings about about ideals of, if I'm understanding the question correctly, about ideals of rock radio and what rock radio was expecting. I don't think he ever liked the Jimi Hendrix comparisons, for example. Even in the MTV interview, he talks about the only real comparison is the fact of the color of they share the same color of skin. But I really do believe that he wanted it both ways. I want to expand my audience, but you know what? I'm gonna do it my way, for better or worse.
I think this next one I think kind of ties into that. I'm recalling it from the chat. But yeah, Lee asking, do you think that this approach that he had, do you think that had any negative impact in terms of how he was either perceived or received in real time?
I do think that it had a negative impact, and I think that uh, I think that the PR stuff didn't help because the criticism was amplified. I mean, if you take the position that rock radio or even rock audiences didn't feel like Prince belonged in their circles, then it would explain why there was such a pushback on Prince as an artist. He wasn't that great of a guitar player. You had, I mean, dude, seriously, like 2 years ago, I think it was the Triple Threat Symposium. When I left the airport in New York to go back home, I had on a 1999 T-shirt, and I was going through security, and the person that was waving me through saw my shirt, and he goes, "Oh, you like you like Prince? Ooh, right?" He gives me that. We're 40 years beyond that, but he
Right.
gives me that based on a 1999, T-shirt. I think those kinds of monikers and tropes have been a detriment to Prince breaking through, and I don't think that he ever broke through to the degree that he lost his Black audience. Prince had a way of bringing us with him. The most telling example of that, and I do have to go back to Purple Rain, so forgive me, but the most telling of that is the 12-inch for Let's Go Crazy and Erotic City. Let's Go Crazy, the extended version that we hear in the film, and a longer version of Erotic City. So you've got side A with, the rockabilly-esque type beat of Let's Go Crazy, and you're doing this. But then when you flip it over and you get Erotic City, you're doing this. It's a whole thing. So we're being it's like an advance and hold, and we come along with him. Advance and hold, and we come along with him. Um, and forgive me, kind of lost my train of thought, but I don't usually publicly dance. The the you know the idea of why Prince had never really gotten his due, I think, lies in just a rooted feeling by publications at that time, both video, multimedia presentations, and in print, that Prince does not belong here unless we let him in.
Wow. Yeah. I think then this next one, I think kind of then drills in similar to that, but then more specifically asking, do you think that the approach to Around the World, did that change Prince's perception in the music press as a serious musician rather than a pop star who sings songs about sex in the music community?
I think by his own words, that part of it, part of it was the quote that I put in the slide, was that he felt that the best thing that he ever did as a 25, 26-year-old was to record Around the World in a Day right after Purple Rain. So basically saying that after the album that I am projecting to be my breakthrough, I'm gonna record the album of what I want to do for the fans. And he says that's why it sounds so completely different because it's what I want to do. So I think that maybe he did have a feeling about how he would be perceived by the music of Purple Rain, and then as a chaser, if you will, create an album of where he was in that time, where his headspace was musically in that time, and there were these other sounds, these other instruments, these other musicians to be able to create the music that he's created on Around the World Today.
This next question from Seeley, I think, is kind of moving the timeline up a little bit, but from that general the hypothesis here about the timeline. Can you expound and explain why we can't see Sign of the Times as the car, or make sure I'm catching this right. Arthur, can you expound and explain what we can't see Sign of the Times as the carcass of the revolution, but as another example of Prince's constant innovation and remaking of himself?
Not to be funny, could you just repeat that one more time?
Yeah, so I think I'm one word off here, and so I think it's saying why do we see Sign of the Times as the carcass of the revolution, thinking of it's an evolution revolution product, but rather than as another example of Prince's constant innovation and remaking of himself.
Um, I think we
Did I
see
catch
it
that
that,
right, Seeley?
yeah, I think that the reason that it's seen like that 40 years after that project, or yeah, 40, almost 40 years after that project, um, it's being looked at through a lens of the revolution because that is the popular incarnation of Prince at that time, fueled by the purple machine of Purple Rain. Any of us, and of course, I'm going to speak for a whole bunch of people, but any of us that bought Sign of the Times in the spring of 1987, I don't believe that we looked at it as a revolution album, except for It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night because it was a live recording of a parade era show with the revolution. I think we saw it for what it was. I think we saw it for the creative endeavor. I mean, I was blown away by, man, you take D'Angelo talks about Prince albums, sounding different one after the other. And I mean, they do. But I mean, you take Around the World in a Day, Parade, and then Sign of the Times. There are, it's I mean, an evolution, yeah. But I mean, these are like leaps. And to kind of view that now through this lens of a group that only lasted professionally for 3 years, I don't think that, to be putting it diplomatically, I don't think that that is a fair assessment or an accurate assessment.
There's one more question. The only reason why I came on is to just double down on in real time. No one thought of the Sign of the Times album as a revolution album. It was a Prince album in real time. So someone, I think it was Cabria, put in the chat the new math. So yeah, so I'm gonna go off and you can ask your last question.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and that basically we've got pretty much I'd say probably 100% agreement in the chat here on that. So um this question from Marcus: was the newsstand downtown Delauer's? Is
Mhm.
that
Oh, sorry, I almost choked. It was Delauer's.
and then and do you think with the relative few performance and no tour, was that time used on filming Under the Cherry Moon?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, without being, a tour manager or anything like that, just kind of like doing the fuzzy math, you figure if the US leg ends in what I say, April, early April, they take a couple months off and maybe they do a summer tour and it starts in like, June somewhere, and then it goes for, let's say 3 months, maybe four, if they go to Asia or something like that. So really he comes back somewhere between, August and October, and you don't get Under the Cherry Moon. And I don't believe that. And we talked about this during the For You panel, where it was like, if if Prince didn't stop I believe that if Prince didn't stop the tour when he did, that we wouldn't get Parade in the way that we got it. Sure, he can record on the road, but if he doesn't have to do a bunch of other concerts of material that he's tired of doing, well, isn't that a positive from a creative standpoint?
All right, I'm coming back on. Thank you so much, Arthur, for your amazing presentation and
Thank you.
that landing like a 10 for gymnast. That's what I'm talking about. So we now know what your time is, an hour. You got it. Thank you so much, Chris.
All right.
For your amazing moderation. I really do appreciate it. You guys can go backstage if you like, unless you want to hang out. I just want to talk for maybe 5 minutes, and then we're going to go to another room for the attendees if you'd like to come on camera and reflect upon the day. We won't be in there for very long, but if you are feeling, the afterglow of the symposium for today, you just want to like be in communion virtually with others, we will do that. So first of all, you might have noticed that you can already watch the videos in the lobby from the sessions earlier today. I forgot to record the welcome, and I also forgot to hit the record button for Edgar's presentation. But there is like a quiet spot in his presentation, but he also has an event, so he's gonna like either redo it or I need to edit it. But to make a long story short, it will be eventually posted on my YouTube channel, so I apologize for that. I didn't do it on purpose, but it's a long story. I want to do a couple of things before we go to the other virtual room. And because I did not record the welcome, I want to share my screen really quickly and make sure that I give thanks to our sponsors. I could not do it without NYU support, so just please bear with me. It's really important I give special thanks to the NYU's Office of the Provost. I have to give a lot of thanks because NYU Tandon has been with us from day one of the Sign of the Times screening and panel way back in 2017. I have to give thanks to also IDM, which is my academic home, which is in the Tandon School of Engineering, and IDM stands for Integrated Design and Media. That is my major that I teach in. There's also the Center for Black Visual Culture at the Institute of African American Affairs, also at NYU, which is led by Dr. Joan Morgan, who is just, if you don't know who Joan Morgan is, Google. You'll be like, she's incredible. And that's also led by Dr. Deborah Willis, who I have an extreme amount of respect for. I don't do nothing compared to Dr. Willis. Like Dr. Willis is one of the hardest working women I know. So when I grow up, I want to be just like her. And she is also the director of NYU's photography and imaging department within the Institute of Emerging Media. And I just have to shout out, I have to keep shouting out Dr. Deborah Willis because I couldn't have done any of this without her continued support. Also, I have to give a shout out to NYU Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality. And I also have to give a very special shout out to NYU's Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music. I'm teaching a course there. My students are amazing. I'm hoping that some of them watch this session. That's their homework. They have to watch a session from the symposium. And then they've also been very supportive in terms of the past symposia as well. And then I also have to give a huge, huge shout out to NYU's Office of Global Inclusion. We call them OGI, for their continued support. I could not have done most of the symposium I've done without their support as well. And then last and definitely not least, I have to give a very special thanks to NYU's Liberal Studies and Arts and Science for their continued support. So I have to take a moment to thank our sponsors because, again, I wouldn't be able to do it without their support. Okay, really quickly, I just want to talk about our last day. It's going by so fast. I can't believe we're already on our third day, which will be tomorrow, and we will be here on Zoom events. We'll have a welcome in the morning at 9, and then we're going to have a Romance 1600 roundtable starting at 9:30. And then we're going to have Romance 1600 presentations at 11:30, and we're still doing our 30-minute breaks. And then because India Mallard isn't able to join us due to a work emergency, we'll have a little bit more time for lunch tomorrow. So lunch break will be from 1 to 2:30 p.m. And then we'll have a roundtable, which I'm really looking forward to, about the family. And that will be from 2:30 to 4. And then from 4:30 to 6:30, we will have the presentations about the family. And then this will come to an end. Once again, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to go immediately over into the other room so you can put on your cameras if you like. If you don't want to put on your cameras, because you don't have to, you can still talk to us like through audio. So just know where your audio and video buttons are, which should be in, if you're on a laptop or a desktop, in your bottom left-hand corner, you'll see an audio mic and a video mic when we go into this other room. So just make sure you're presentable in case, you're hanging out in your pajamas from yesterday, okay? So let's do some room hopping right now.